На сцене должен был быть мой коллега Антон.
My colleague Anton was expected to present, but you see, you're not lucky you have me again. However, I'll try to convey everything that Anton wanted to say. This is Anton, and he is the author.
Том, о чем будет доклад.
In fact, the most important person behind this research, is his work and his ideas that were implemented in everything I'm going to talk about. He's a virus analyst. He's an experienced hand in cyber threats. Now he's working very hard on actually making his knowledge available to more people. Now, I'm the head of the department fighting malware. So my department is actually responsible for malware fighting elements of positive technology solutions too. We talked about rootkits yesterday, bootkits today. So this is the plan. And we are going to, have some respite, so to speak, after the previous presentation. There will be an introduction. Next, we'll talk about detecting old bootkits, legacy bootkits, as well as detection of modern bootkits, UEFI bootkits. Now, let me remind you what bootkits are. Shown above is the launch sequence. Actually, we can spend a whole hour talking about the individual stages, but let's talk very generally. There is some preparation, then there is the kernel loading, and finally everything else gets loaded in the operating system. This is like the simplest way of explaining it. And the bootkit sits in the first stage, so to speak. And it's there to actually impact the way that the operating system is loaded. So the objective of the bootkit is to screw up the legitimate loading process. Forgive my French. So the objective or the purpose of the bootkit is to start up as soon as possible, because the sooner it starts, the more difficult it will be to detect. Moreover, this way it maximizes the privileges it gets and the opportunities it has for compromisation and installation of its own malicious code. So naturally, bootkits, if they're successful, will undermine the root of trust. Like the sooner a bootkit is started, the more we should doubt the root of trust. Indeed, you never know, which computer will be secure and safe and which will not be. There are two classes, two types of bootkits. Some are designed for legacy BIOS systems, and others are designed for UEFIs. So how we go into research and identify bootkits? We'll need hypervisors and virtual machines for that. So when we're dealing with a computer that is restarted, will kick into action again, we will not really have a reliable tool for tracking the whole startup chain. So naturally, we need an observer, so to speak, who will actually be able to monitor this complicated process, which means we need a hypervisor, we need virtual machines that will, effectively reproduce what a regular machine does. So when I say hypervisor, I mean Dracwolf, our favorite tool that we always talk about. Naturally, it's not the only tool like that. So we can be using a Xen or a KVM, though the best combination is KVM. And additionally, you would want to have
они имеют свои различные, ну, API, давайте тогда скажем.
More things attached to it, let's put it like this. And various hypervisors will use various APIs, but in any case, we will want to
Для этого придумали решение библиотеку libvmi.
to standardize many operations, and that's why a libvmi library has been developed, which is like an intermediary between hypervisor and the abstraction, which will be human readable, so to speak.
Также в libvmi, это вот правая часть.
Also, libvmi, and this is the right-hand part of the slide,
цепочки событий с callback'ами.
will support, callbacks and event log handling. So there will be like a chain of events happening, and for every event,
выполнить еще что-то и каким-то образом повлиять на дальнейшую.
you will be able to do things, and you will therefore be able to impact the work of the system. Without libvmi, it would be very difficult. On top of libvmi, we have dragwoof, and dragwoof actually provides the right level of abstraction for a programmer or a security analyst. So, for example, you can set breaks for syscalls, and it also enables you to say partialize a symbol into an address and obtain objects from the system and process lists and what have you. And then, go from these objects to additional information on processes, identifiers, what have you. So this is by way of introduction, really. Now, where would we want to use it and how? And again, let me stress, we are talking about some fundamentals of how bootkits work. We can go into details, but that would take too much time. And they do have some common denominators that I'm interested in exploring for this presentation. So, why do we care about legacy biased bootkits when it's 2022? Vendors are actually producing reports on FinSpy and other, legacy bootkits, really. So it's using both UEFI and legacy versions, so to speak, of bootkits. So this is one of the explanations for why we shouldn't turn a blind eye to it. It's still sensible to use because virtual infrastructure in many cases is actually legacy based. And also we need to remember the country we live in, right? In this country, indeed, many machines are still BIOS-based, not UEFI-based, and absolutely we need to take this into account. So this is the operating system startup process for BIOS. So the code, I guess it's a BIOS code, kicks in, which actually prepares the computer for some primitive operations with memory and hard drive. And then, MBR takes over. Master boot record finds the active portion and produces a VBR from it. Volume boot record, and volume boot record will contain a pointer to a larger chunk of code than, say, MBR, which will parse the NTFS structure and will extract the code from it, and it's called IPL. It doesn't take too much space up, but it actually requires more space than VBR, hence this transition. Next, we have the boot manager, and boot manager extracts boot configuration parameters, and it prepares the next stage, which is a kernel launch. The other nuance is probably not that important. Finally, and loads will start loading the core, the kernel of the operating system, and the rest of the runtime will be started after that, but we don't really care about it for this presentation. So this is the startup chain. Now, it's very important for the bootkit to be started as soon as possible. Now, can we actually start at the BIOS stage? Wouldn't that be great?
часть кода может на всех компьютерах там, да, существенно отличаться, если разные
Now, the thing
технологии
is that
разработки
in
и так
different
далее.
computers,
Да,
it
и
may be
ошибка
dramatically
в коде,
different, particularly if they're coming from
заражение
different
вирусом,
vendors,
все
and a
равно
mistake
существенно
in
заблокирует этот
code,
компьютер, и это большой риск, то есть он просто себя не
if it's
оправдывает.
at
Поэтому
the bias
вирус
level,
писателя
it
начали с
will
того,
probably
что
brick
заражали
the
МБР,
computer, so
затем
it's not
ВБР.
feasible.
Вот давайте
Some
разберемся, как они это делали.
virus
Соответственно, в случае МБР,
authors
понятно самое, да,
chose
очевидно,
to
это
attack
загружается
MBR.
стандартной загрузочной записи. То
So
есть у них
with
была ВБ,
MBR,
загружается
naturally,
ВБ. Нам
you
важно
will,
не то, как они это сейчас построили,
manipulate
нам
the
важно это
master
заделать.
boot
Вот
records.
первая, да, часть
And it's
действий
important to remember.
буткита, ну или того, что устанавливает буткита, это заразить МБР. То есть у нас на
So
код
the first
попадает
thing a
сюда.
bootkit will do
Что
is to
дальше? Дальше
infect
можно добраться
MBR.
до ВБР, и тут уже
Next,
варианты.
we
Можно
can go
создать
to
новый
VBR,
активный
and
раздел,
here we can
соответственно, будет
either
новая
create
ВБР,
a new
она
active
будет указывать
section,
на
new
плюсик
VBR,
какой-то там, да, уже вредоносный код в разделе IPL
which will
от
point to
следующей
its
стадии
own
заражения.
malicious code.
Можно взять действующий активный раздел, действующий ВБР,
Or
подменить
alternatively, we can
куда она указывает. Можно
take
подменить
the current
указатель на
VBR
свою IP,
and
который мы где-то
change the
расположим.
code in
Так или
it.
иначе,
Or we
стадия
can
заражения может
actually
быть ВБР. Чуть
manipulate a
ниже уже нет
pointer to
смысла особо
IPL,
заражать, потому что это
so that it
слишком
points
уже
to our own payload.
фундаментальные этапы. Буткитам гораздо надежнее оказаться вот на стадии работы
And bootkits should
ВБР.
really choose one of these
Соответственно,
options.
заражение,
They need
как
to attack either
сказал, здесь
MBR
все
or
достаточно
VBR.
просто с точки
So the
зрения,
infection
да,
itself is pretty
пользователя.
simple.
Есть юзермод, из юзермода есть
In the
соответствующий
user
API, который
runtime.
получает доступ
So in the
к
user mode, there
диску
will be an
силовому
API
устройству,
that will
после
get
чего
access
производится
to
запись
the hard drive.
в
It's like
соответствующий
raw
сектор
access, and
жесткого
then
диска. Ну,
an
там,
entry is made in certain sectors of
отдельно
the
проговорить,
disk.
сегодня мы на это
There
внимание
will be
не
shifts
заостряем.
there, but
То есть
probably
есть
we
API, в
shouldn't be
общем-то,
talking about it
заражение
today.
таким буткитом можно
So there is an
фиксировать
API, and
в обыкновенной, да,
infections
среде
with such
анализа,
a
среде
bootkit can actually be registered in an analytical environment,
То же самое
in a
касается
sandbox.
там, заражения ВБР, заражения IPL, то
The
есть это
same
все
will
про
be
zero
true
доступ,
for
как сразу
VBR and
написано.
IPL
Есть также
infection,
вариант
because
записи
it's
на
a
диск
similar
через каждый
type,
интерфейс, но
effectively, of
опять-таки,
access,
да, это
just
делать
different
контроль из
partition.
юзер-мода, здесь чего-то такого принципиального не будет.
Well, this would be like
Итого, давайте
another
попытаемся понять на этом этапе, что мы имеем с
implementation
точки
of the
зрения работы
same.
Legacy Bootkiта.
So,
У нас
what do we
есть
have here with the legacy
возможность
bootkit?
проверить МБР, ВБР, IPL.
Now, we can actually check MBR, VBR, and IPL
Соответственно, мы можем
as
на
potential
старте
spots
анализа
for a
посчитать
bootkit.
хэш-суммы
So at the start of
разделов.
our analysis, we
По
can
окончании
calculate
анализа
hash
вновь
sums of
посчитать
these
хэш-суммы и
sections at
сравнить.
the end
Если
of our
совпадение,
analysis.
значит
We can
случилось
get hash
заражение.
sums again,
Как оно
and if
произошло,
there is
с
any
помощью
mismatch, there must
разовых
have been
методов направляющих квадов
infection.
или как-то иначе, не так важно.
And
Важно,
the
что
methods
в
previously
естественном порядке
described
такого случиться
must have
не
been used for
должно.
that. Well,
Но с точки
naturally,
зрения
whatever the
реализации,
methods, we should make sure it doesn't happen.
необходимо было сделать. Не было функционала, который позволяет
So on Druckwolf,
прочитать
we did
диск
not really
локальной
have
машины,
functions that would
и при
enable
этом
Druckwolf
вычислить
to read the
все
drive
эти
of a
записи
VM
загрузочные и
in
предварительный
order
код
to
IPL,
perform this
и как-то его читать,
comparison I've just described.
анализировать. Поэтому потребовалась вот эта вот служебная часть работы. Мы написали код
So we had to
для
do this
библиотеки
extra
libvmi,
coding.
которая научилась
We
зачитывать
updated
диски в
the
разных форматах, в цифровом
libvmi
формате,
library, and
специальном формате
it's
QCOM.
now able to
Ну, после, соответственно, чего
read
мы имели возможность
different
пошире
formats, be
структуру
it RAW
получить
or
данные.
QCOW2.
Ну, вот фрагменты кода, как эти суммы считаются, здесь ничего
These
сложного,
are
наверное, вы не
fragments of the
увидите.
code. There
Вот
is
я
nothing
рассказал,
difficult,
как здесь
really. This
реализовано. Дальше
is the
просто
usual
восстановление
sum calculation
подсчитанных хэш-сумм. Вот очень простой рабочий метод, как обнаруживать огромные
and comparison.
пласты буткитов под
It's
legacy
really
системы.
a
Но мы
very
решили на
easy
этом
way
остановиться.
of
И такие, ну
identifying
хорошо,
lots
у
of
нас получилось
bootkits
заражение
in
системы.
legacy systems.
Давайте мы попробуем
Okay,
проанализировать
let's assume we do
процесс
have
запуска
this
операционки
infection.
после этого действия.
Now let's analyze the process of operating
Зачем?
system
Ну, в
startup
частности, потому что
after
существует
the bootkit
табличка
infection.
interrupt vector table, в которой
So there
каждый
is this
бootkit
interrupt vector
сделает
table
одну
where
важную
every
вещь. Смотрите,
bootkit
запишет
will do a very
по
important thing.
13-му смещению указатель на обработчик
So with a
дисковых
shift
операций.
13,
Каждому
it is
букету,
actually
чтобы
going
успешно
to
загрузить
rewrite the
операционную
processor
систему,
for
потребуется
drive
перехватить
operations
это
because
требование,
every
чтобы
bootkit will
дальше
need to
верифицировать
intercept
доступ к
this
вот все
particular
известные legacy
interrupt.
букеты
So
действовали по
all the
такому
known
принципу.
legacy
И мы
bootkits
захотели заодно этот момент
use this
проверить,
particular method.
происходит
So
ли
we decided
перехват
that we should
хендлерами
also
LDT,
check
или,
that.
возможно, еще какие-то
So we
хендлеры
need to see
перехватываются.
if
Значит, нам
there
нужно
is
было на
any
стадии
interception
предзагрузки
of this particular
в этот
handler,
момент
which means at the
получить
pre-boot
управление,
stage, we
зафиксировать
need
перехват
to
на табличке
actually
LDT,
get
чтобы в
the
дальнейшем
control, get
этот перехват
hijack it,
обработать и, собственно, это
so that
легче
we can
зарегистрировать.
actually
Для этого
see
мы
if
поступили очень
such an
хитро, и как
action
будет на
is
слайде, я
performed
это так
later.
расскажу.
This
Кто
stuff I'm not going to
анализировал
show in a slide.
библиотеки
If you have analyzed libraries in user mode, you must have seen that it's often very convenient to set a breakpoint for jump -1 instruction. Well, this way, the instruction will jump back to itself. In assembly code, it will look like EB if something. So we did pretty much the same. So we took MBR, and the first byte we would actually rewrite with EBFE. This way, we were able to reboot the virtual machine, wait some time, then connect DruckWolf, and then, we would know right away where we are. We could stop the machine anytime and, substitute the bytes and so on. But when we get to the product part of this process, we realized that it's taking too much time. So we found a special call which will take us to hypervisor. It's so-called VM halt call, and it results in the same thing as the NOP instruction in assembler. So it does take a bit of time, while requiring very little capacity on the CPU side. So we put it in a cycle for Xen hypervisors. And then, DruckWolf would kick into action. It would restore the byte sequence. And then we do the interception of the IVT table. This is what it looks like. So we do this hooking trap in the IVT table. And, once the breakpoint is triggered, we'll actually see which particular handler was overwritten. So this is effectively additional information on how a particular bootkit prefers to work. Next, we remembered Rovnix. So Rovnix, as you probably remember, was quite successful in putting next element of malicious code in the IDT table, which is analogous to IVT. So IDT table, it has interrupts in the first half of the table, but not the second one. So the zeros in the second one were rewritten by Rovnix with malicious code, and then it's a handover control there. So we tried finding where this handover is happening, to a secure mode. And this function is called BM main, I think. In boot manager exe, so boot manager is the part that works in real mode, while boot manager.exe works in the secure mode for the CPU. So in the first part, IDT gets initialized. Then there is this obscure jump happening, and then it's boot mgr exe kicking into action. And once we are in BML, we can actually check the state of the IDT table. And if in the second half of this table there is something besides the zeros, we realize that something must have been written there, something malicious possibly. So it could be Rovnix or some other bootkit. We can actually see that there are some simple operations here. So we are comparing bytes to zeros, and once we see that there is something rather than zero, there will be a message that we've got some weird shit in IDT that shouldn't be there. So this has been an interesting challenge about, using DruckWolf at an early stage, because previously we used it for user mode and kernel mode. We called it DruckWolf 16, like Artemis 16, which is, a nuclear research city in former Soviet Union. So once DruckWolf 16 has done its stuff, it hands the operations over to DruckWolf regular. Now let's talk UEFI. It's actually less complicated with UEFI. I mean, I could have given you a more convoluted picture had I, drilled deeper into the UEFI element in this flowchart. We won't really be talking about a UEFI initialization, about the individual drivers firing up there. What we care about is that there are state boards there, like SPI, what have you, and then it's sort of handed over to the program blocks which are sitting in UEFI system partition, and all the other elements of UEFI boot managers, and as well as NTS kernel, which is obviously sitting elsewhere, but all the other stages, they're actually very similar to what we had in legacy, which means that the objective here is the same. UEFI boot manager is doing the preparation, and then it loads the kernel. So all the interesting things happen at the UEFI stage. So what do the modern bootkits do? Those that are targeting UEFI systems. So we have UEFI system partition, which stores some of the critical components, such as the boot manager. Now, a boot manager can be patched or substituted. For example, if you remove it and you put boot manager another one, maybe even in a different folder, and then you reinitialize BCD so that it's pointing at a different file. Well, then you will be using a totally different file for starting up the whole system. It's a primitive way of doing it, but it works. So FinSpy recently rediscovered, had the same kind of vector, had the same kind of peculiarity. So how do we quantify all these components? Well, we had to find this UEFI system partition, and this is GDT markup, right? Which means that we're using GUI GUIDs here, and we're looking here for type GUID, and then we do FAT32 parsing, which we actually did in Dragwolf itself, and then we would take the files and folder lists, and now we would, check the checksums. I mean, it would take the hashes of boot x64. It's actually backup of the regular UEFI. So if the first one doesn't work, you can actually leverage the backup, and BCD is a host of BCD parameters which impact the way that the operating system is booted. Then, all this content we would hash, just like the list of folders. And then if we discovered that, something got changed, then obviously we were dealing with the bootkit in the system partition. I guess it's a pretty obvious stage. Not so obvious will follow. This is something that happened in 2018 when LoJack's bootkit was discovered. Since then, some bootkits were discovered for which the initial infection vector was discovered. For most, it wasn't. Now, LoJack's would actually infect SPI, and it would rewrite the firmware. So when we are talking about UEFI bootkits, the big question is, how do we infect SPI? So there's vulnerability issues in SMM, what have you, they're all designed to actually infect the SPI. Well, hence we are going to discuss the most interesting elements of this particular infection trajectory. So I'm showing here an excerpt from ESET's study on how LoJack's worked. I should probably that LoJack's, just like TrigBoot, they both used a driver called RV Everything, which is a legitimate driver, in order to interact with the firmware. Well, neat, isn't it, rather than redo a pile of code. So if you want to detect at least some infections, you can actually search for a driver like this. If it's emerges on your system, there must be a reason for that. Both TrigBoot and LoJack's later on use the same approach.
нужно записать в SPI, нужно как-то до нее
So
добраться.
we need to write information to SPI. We need to get access to SPI before that. And every PCI device, SPI included, has a so-called PCI configuration space, 256 bytes long. And here in the center, you see this large white quadrangle called base address registry. So this is the place we need to get. So with a certain shift, you will be able to find there RCBA cell, root complex base address register. So as the name suggests, it's a register, and it contains a particular value, which shows the place in the physical memory of the computer, which will contain RCRB. Complicated, isn't it? I can go again through that if you're losing me. So there is a register that contains values which point to the physical memory where other registers are listed. So it's important for the driver to obtain the information about where in the physical memory of the computer this list of registers can be found. So these are managing registers for dealing or for managing SPI. So LoJax will actually work with these registers, and you will see lots of, weird abbreviations, alphabet soup there. And, there is a sequence of commands on how to read them and how to write back into SPI. So the question is, how do we, PCI configuration space, how do we actually get access to it, particularly given the offsets? Well, there are two ways of doing that. The first one is shown here, and it's actually the one that was used both by TrickBoot and LoJax. So we are using here in and out assembler commands with config address and config data ports. So this way we can write or read into the address space of a PCI device. And as parameters there, we will be using, say, the address shown in green here, and this address is coded from initial information on the bus and the device and the number of the function. And the fourth parameter is the actual register offset. Well, we actually need to do the writing or the reading. So there is a formula that actually encodes all these four values into a single figure. So this slide lists all the actions you need to perform in order to detect UEFI bootkits. Now, let me walk you through this logic again, because I understand that, just listening to this probably helps little. So first, you need to use in-out instructions for specific ports in order to get information on PCI address space. Now, when you have the ability to read data from this space, you will be able to read RCBA registry value with references to physical memory space, and there you will be able to find information on the specific registers, and you can use their address value to read and write data from or in SPI. There is also a way of getting access to SPI address space a different way. In modern chipsets, this managing register block will be shown in a CPI table. So we can grab the physical address there, which means you don't really need to do assembler in-out instructions. But we decided to do exactly that because this is considered a more reliable method, and this is how bootkits do it. Now, some people say that mapping of physical memory, when it's, virtually represented, may result in a race condition. I'm not sure this is the case. We haven't tested it. But what was a decisive factor for us was that, in Xen, we didn't really have the offset in the ACPI table. So We may actually do it later. It's on our to-do list. So we understand now how bootkits infected SPI, and we wanted to develop a detection routine. So we are looking now for in and out instructions because they're effectively about escaping from a virtual machine to the hypervisor. Well, without them, the hypervisor will not be able to analyze the state of the virtual machine. There are many assembler instructions that would result in something like this. For example, ACPI UID. There is also RDT-SC instruction, which enables you to check processor time intact. But we didn't really know how to leverage it. It was not available on libvmi or DRACWOOF or in Xen API even. So we actually had to update Xen, and then this, I guess, so we actually added the instructions for handling those situations when, there is a VM exit for an in-out operation. And this way we can actually process it in DRACWOOF. So we set intercepts for every case of escape from a VM for any in-out instruction, and then we check which port is being addressed. So if it's a particular, say, PCI config address port, we will be guessing that somebody is trying to read PCI configuration space, which is a good marker that something can be going wrong. But responses naturally may differ. So, for example, we can talk about like secure boots are being off and say writing to SPI without any issues, or like SMM modes, which was leveraged by Logex, where the bits responsible for two other bits enabled one of the bits to be put to 0, or one of the streams could be put into SMM mode, or race condition could be leveraged in order to switch off the other protective bit. So these different manipulations are available for sure.
Снимается как вопрос, потому что сам факт того, что происходит некая уже разведка и попытка получения информации.
But, if you see that, there is a request to the firmware, somebody is trying to recon, obviously you have enough time to thwart it. Naturally, this is not the end of this research. We obviously realize that
на всякий такой же, пожарный, проработать векторы.
Just to be on the safe side, we also need to consider other vectors such as SMM mode code execution. And we're even thinking of developing an event tracing system in UEFI so that, we can actually see, how modules are invoking UEFI APIs. The most important problem right now is that in the current version of Xen, there is no information on SPI. There is, in fact, no opportunity to properly analyze the SMM modes, which means that, additional code development will be required. Since I've got more time, I should say that actually updating Xen is a headache, because they will accept patches to their project, the old way, through email. So several times we tried doing that, and they blocked our email account, because we're sending div files. When we were able to get in touch with the key people at Xen, they kept giving us feedback on what else they would like to change. But we're not mobile developers. We weren't really in the business for a code review and refactoring. So we're hoping the community will step in. But we also have it in our pipeline. So the stage, or the state right now, is that we are going to make it public on GitHub, obviously DRACWOOF. There will be a new plugin there called bootkitmon, where we are going to deploy everything I've already described, naturally dependencies for Xen and libVMI. So the current state is that, we are polishing it, we are finalizing development. Right, final thoughts and conclusions. So there are bootkits and they differ. However, they do have some common denominators. So in fact, we may not care that much about a particular family a given bootkit belongs to, because there are ways of, identifying them very early, where they don't differ. But we need to be able to register the bad events. If we do that ahead of time, so to speak, or if we do in time, we won't even care. Intercepting such events in the system is difficult if we don't really know how we can do it outside a virtual machine, outside a sandbox. The biggest problem we have is that during the pre-boot process, lots of interesting things are happening, and we would love to be able to get some visibility there so that we can actually identify something weird, something suspicious. And the solution we have developed, I think, is an interesting architectural find. So please help us save the world from malicious bootkits. Thank you very much, and look forward to our plugin. We have over 15 minutes for questions.
Там уже, да, видимо, первые подошли, давайте оттуда вопрос послушаем.
Меня слышно хорошо?
Да, слышно, здравствуйте.
Собственно, добрый день. Я бы хотел просто попросить услышать пару слов о восстановлении корректной работы. Восстановление конкретной работы загрузки операционной системы после того, как bootkit
Restoration of the boot process. Once the bootkit has already created with the system. I won't give you any fancy recommendations, really, because if we're talking about the firmware, and if the firmware has been infected, it's not a typical case. It's like one thing when you can deploy, snapshots of an operating system, like the same operating system everybody knows. But, firmwares, they're all so different, and some users don't update their firmware. I'm not sure there is a reliable automated solution. I think you can do, for example, memory dumps of chipsets and boot records if we're talking about the legacy systems, and then restore from that. And oversight. Or potentially you may want to do EDR. I'm not sure there is even, a centralized solution possible, let alone available. Hello. Thank you very much. My question is about the prospects of your plugin. And how can I actually participate in the development, given that your GitLab is further evolution will be available in Dracwoof. So what I've been talking about is an announcement. I'm just saying that we're almost ready to make it available to the public, and I'm making sure there are no stupid bugs left in it. So, to open the doors. And going forward, we'll need to teach a hypervisor to support more modern chipsets. And just like I said, UEI tracing is another element in our roadmap.
Добрый день. Скажите, мы сейчас с вами рассмотрели такой некий форенсик, да, то есть уже постфактум.
Now we've been talking about this, forensics case, really, analysis post facto, so to speak. What about prevention? How do we make sure there is no infection, preferably in an automated manner?
части, да, там первого пункта ответа на вопрос, превентить нужно не bootkit, превентить нужно то, что его устанавливают.
But what you need to prevent is not the bootkit, but rather installation of bootkit, because any malware, before it drops the bootkit, will do lots and lots of things like recon and persistence and what have you. So this is the stage where you would want to intercept it. In order to install a legacy bootkit, obviously you will need rights to write into the boot record. So if a particular solution can actually observe in real time all attempts at accessing the raw data in the boot record in real time, that's what you need. For UEFI, well, you may also want to track the access to MVRAM variables, MVRAM variables. Some of the recent variables, you can actually switch secure boot off. And indeed, there is this upload functionality for some commercially available laptops like this. So this is something that you should be able to do in real time.
Вопрос здесь и еще там вопрос.
Спасибо большое за доклад. Извините, такой вопрос. А что из перечисленного вообще нужно, если
Which of the things you've listed will be required if we have a trusted execution path, if we have a proper boot guard, if we have secure boot? Well, they do have their problems for sure, but all the known cases of, say, implants in the firmware, at least in public knowledge, they will all be abusing misconfiguration of the platform or bugs in the firmware. Do we really need something like this? On the preventative side, if we've got everything I've mentioned.
Смотрите, здесь есть часть про то, как
сделать
незаметно запись по сырому в диск или взаимодействовать с SPI. Как минимум было уже озвучено два варианта, как добраться до маппинга регистра. То есть если мы...
Well, we've mentioned two ways of gaining access to registry mapping. So if we don't know how to take the address out of a CPI, well, you can completely skip the stage for detection, so to speak. No, but SMM will not allow anything, right? Because SPI is only available from system management mode. Yes, absolutely, but there are bugs in system management mode, which can also be abused. So when you've got boot guard and secure boot and the whole root of trust, the only vulnerability remains in the SMM. And research done by various vendors, including by well-known Alexander Matrosov, many vendors make this mistake. So many products in the IT world, they get released with bugs and errors. So indeed, you can disconnect some of the protections from SMM and then drop your bootkit. So effectively, we need to analyze the firmware in order to find obvious bugs in the SMM. Our approach so far has been different. We've been looking at how we can identify a bootkit which is already there, which is a forensic kind of exercise. Absolutely. It's a forensic exercise on a test system. Thank you.
Хорошо.
My question has already been answered.
Спасибо за доклад. Я здесь, если что.
Да, вижу вас. Здравствуйте.
Здрасте. Thank you for your presentation.
Несколько вопросов.
I've got several questions. The first one is about the plugins and modules that you mentioned. Are they integrated in the products anyway?
Та часть, которая идет в open source, которой могут пользоваться все.
Yeah, it's part of the product.
Пользователи сэндбокса, они как бы могут...
So, the users of the sandbox, if, say, they're analyzing a particular bootkit using your product, they will be getting an alert or some notification.
Именно саму я там могу ее каким-либо образом подампить и сам отреверсить.
Is there a way I can dump and reverse engineer it? Well, there are not too many users who will be able to analyze what the product can dump. But, in fact, if there is a discrepancy in hash sums,
и оригинальной, и измененной части, чтобы можно было это
then
сохранить.
there will be like an automated dump of the original hash and the modified one. It's an open source solution. I guess it can be integrated into other systems as well. So the way we've done it is that for a legacy bootkits or legacy systems, rather, we can provide you with an option to, force restart the system. We haven't done that for UEFI yet. This option will not be available there for the moment. If we get to the stage where we will be able to register the fact of write operation into SPI, we should be able to do the dump, of firmware before and after and run a comparison.
Взаимодействие там с SPI, все дела.
When you talked about this interaction with SPI and interception and analysis, I was wondering about the other tools, such as ChipSec, for dealing with SPI. So how did you choose effectively a customized solution? ChipSec or UF2, they're all designed for the operating system interface, so to speak. But here we're showing you an example in the wild, so to speak, where with in-out constructions you can get access to, physical memory map. Otherwise, interacting with the firmware itself, we haven't found. If you know them, please talk to me later. I actually believe that, if there are other solutions available, we should integrate them as well.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
Вижу, да, вопрос.
Да, здравствуйте, меня зовут Александр. Хотел узнать,
Hi, I'm Alexander.
плагин, он фактически будет детектировать именно
So this
расхождение по
plugin,
сумме?
it's going to effectively detect issues based on checksum deviation, or will it also be tracking for some activities? Well, because, some companies that, for example, they have lots of hardware, they need to install new firmware on a regular basis. How are they going to use it?
Тавтологии, да, получится затрассировать режим работы
When we learn how to effectively trace the component interaction on UEFI, then such research could be easier to perform.
В режиме UEFI, собственно, все это хозяйство выполнять и следить за тем, что происходит. Просто сама по системе UEFI это как маленькая операционная система.
Well, UEFI subsystem is effectively a small operating system because there is an SDK and even GUI for it. Like it's in our roadmap, but we also want to strike some balance between the amount of resources it requires and the demand for it, really. Because we would really hate to spend too much time doing it and then saying it's not used by anybody. Well, hence, I'm actually talking about here. This is how we are gauging potential interest in it.
Вижу, да, вот здесь вопрос.
Да, здравствуйте, спасибо за доклад. Вопрос следующий. Известны разные антисиф технологии, которые используются в UEFI.
There are various anti-theft technologies used in UEFI, also targeting bootkits.
То есть антисиф-продукт можно активировать легальным образом, можно активировать...
An anti-safe product can be activated legally or by actually
Видите ли вы какой-то детект именно
patching the SPI?
легальные и нелегальные возможности, и, соответственно, дальнейшее использование таких продуктов? То есть, грубо говоря, DXE модуль, он будет цельный,
DXE module
но при этом
will
он
stay
работает, либо
holistic, so to speak, will not change.
Пользователь хочет этого, либо он работает, пользователь не хочет этого.
Кажется, понял вопрос, но, кстати, вот LogicX это и есть немножко, да,
I probably understand your question. Well, LogicX actually
что я вижу в плане
shows how, a product like this was analyzed.
Организации появилось, да.
Now, let's imagine that in your organization, you have the need for a solution that would be deployed on numerous user machines, so then everything would be locked, so that, it cannot be removed, and, it's sitting in a trusted zone.
переформировать образ виртуальной машины, который, собственно...
Well, then, for example, you can actually redesign the image of the virtual machine. You can actually build it there, then it will be considered a legit part of it. And this environment will be no different from whatever is used in the organization, will not be considered, malicious. But, this sheer fact of automated installation of it, well, it goes into the product once, you will discover the bootkit once, because, it does act as a bootkit, but, it will be just, a single false positive, right?
Компании, там, группы компаний, филиалов это оградить от дальнейших срабатываний, и дальше это будет искать новые какие-то...
So you should be able to avoid further false positives like this.
Двоякая, да, с одной стороны, это можно установить действительно легально.
And it's a double-edged sword,
С другой стороны, кто-то может
because, you can do it because, this is how you do your cybersecurity. Or alternatively, it can be done with malicious purposes, to spy, say, on a bunch of users. So it's a security strategic decision. I think we actually need, to see, one signal like this. And then, you can whitelist it, you can respond to it, and then you can whitelist if it is not malicious. We still have like 3 minutes. Questions? Maybe we have time for one question.
Не вижу рук. Спасибо вам за внимание. Надеюсь...
Thank you very much. I hope you're going to use it.